All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for being here on this cold, rainy Wednesday. We're going to start something new today, which I'm pretty excited about. We're going to get into the nervous system. So we've got a couple weeks of lecture on the nervous system and the brain, and then you'll find the next couple labs after your lab practical will be relevant as well. We'll do the skull, and then we'll do the nervous system and brain lab. So lots of nervous system stuff coming up here. Before we dive into it, just a reminder that on Tuesday, we have a cool guest coming to talk with us about her work in conservation biology. It's actually an OWU alum from a couple of years back, and that's part of our biology seminar series lectures on Tuesday afternoon in the Science Center. So come check it out, and there'll be snacks. Today's agenda, we're going to play a game called Name That Bone, which is a small group activity. Then I've got like a short survey question for you. And then we're going to start into the nervous system. I've got some activities around that. And then I have a closing slide with some reminders and a kind of funny cartoon. No ticket out today, just some reminders about what's going on. That's the gist. Before we get started on Name That Bone, any questions you have? Cool. All right, so this is the deal. I'm going to give each pair or small group of you a bone here, and your job is going to be to work together and name that bone. And if it's a paired bone, then be sure to indicate if it's left or right. So as best you can work through that. We're going to do this 3 times. So take notes as you go to mark down what your 3 bones are, because we do the survey in a minute, and you're going to have to tell me what 3 bones you had. So just take notes on it. And I'll give you about a minute or so for each bone. I probably should have done 2. We'll see how it goes with a minute, and then we'll rotate and you'll get a new bone. So go ahead and grab a group partner or small group of 3, and I'll go around and distribute some bones for you. This guy. Oh, you're good. Are we? You're in the house separate. Yeah. You guys get it. Yeah. I started the timer before I gave everyone their bone, so take it a second, figure it out, and check in. You guys ready this one out? Yeah. See if while you're here, so you can name some of the features on this bone. You guys figured this out? Holly March, you got this one? Oh yeah. Tricky one. Yeah. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Nope. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We're doing an activity where each small group has a bone in your workspace. So you might need to jump on and try this through or all right, some of the groups have it, some of the groups are working on it. Give another minute to figure out if you guys got it. What is it? Oh wait, yes. Really wait which I'm not yeah, you said that with a lot of enthusiasm. Yeah, it's still on open too. That's impressive. Yeah, it's only gonna get better. All right, let's go ahead. Yep. You guys have your screen time. Okay. I'm gonna rotate here. Bone number 2. Wait, no, it's a cube.
See that?
Left to right. Here. Read that one. It's bones, part of which is called. See if we can figure out if it's left or right. Read this one. All right, let's go on to one more. There's this. Does anyone have a new bone? Okay. Your job right now is to work with Holly Martin and look at what it is. We just put you on blast just as you walk in. No time to even sit down. If you can name that bone, then you're all good.
Yeah. Yes. There we go.
Figure it out. What is it? Yeah, let's do that now. Left or right bone, wrong orientation. Yeah. This is the lateral. We're going to figure this out. Got this. See if you can name here.
You're looking at it.
What is what it is?
I really like came up with that. This is like a goal. I couldn't even tell you. I already my motion. And I was like, this way. I'm gonna creep you out there until I come like directly. Oh, I don't know what.
Figure this one out, Abby.
It looks like it's trying. It's hard.
Did you get it?
No.
That I think might be the most challenging one. So I'll give you a hint. It's an L shape. It's got a perpendicular plate and a horizontal.
That makes it clear.
All right, so what I'd like you to do now, go around and collect those bones. It's just an activity to get you interacting with this. As you know, as you can see, it's very different interacting with some of these bones in the 3D model versus looking at diagrams, which is why I wanted to do this. In lab, of course, you'll have more chance to do that, but just a little warm-up activity. Go ahead and take 3 minutes and just answer some questions about this and a little bit more about the skull. This is essentially a ticket out in the middle of class. I will these bones while you do that, and then we'll dive into the nervous system. That's your boomer. You want to keep yeah, I'll come back. You guys free this one? Maybe. What's your guess? No, the epaulet is really it's like kind of walnut shaped almost. So this is your one. And so it forms, this is the hard part of your hard palate. It's the posterior most part of your hard palate. So it takes to like this. And this is going to be the all your cavity. See some people still typing. Just go ahead and finish up. When you're done, just set your phone down so I can see who's done. Cool. All right. So yeah, we'll come back to the skull. We'll do some more review activities as we move forward into some new topics. But I want to start on the nervous system today. So the nervous system is your master control and integration system, meaning that it's really all about information. It's about receiving information from the world around you, but also from inside your body. And then doing something with that information, integrating it, putting different pieces of information together, and then changing what your body does in response to that information. And so we can divide the nervous system into three kind of conceptual tasks. And that is your sensory input. So the example here is just seeing something, but that can also, of course, be the sense of touch, the sense of smell, etc. Then we have integration, which primarily happens in your brain, where all of that different sensory input kind of gets mixed together and interpreted. Then we have a signal going out to either a muscle or a gland that is your motor output. And that allows you to interact with the world or change something inside your body in response to that information you get. We're going to dive into this in some detail in this class. We'll spend a fair bit of time on looking at the nervous system on a cellular level, and then also get into the brain a bit over the next couple of weeks. And so at least to start, I've got a study guide for you. This is, again, similar to what I had for the skull, where it's diagrams and things like that from class to help just be a resource for you. Again, this isn't an assignment. I won't collect it. Just something for you to have to help you organize your notes and as a resource. So you can save, it's a Google slide. You could just save it as your own slide and take notes on it or do whatever you want. The feedback I've been getting from folks is that these are useful for you. And so I will keep doing them. That sounds good to me. So let me give you a second to get that set up, and then we'll start talking about the nervous system. So let me walk through this diagram here. I want to go through three steps. I mentioned this briefly, but just to make it explicit. Sensory receptors monitor changes in the environment known as stimuli, importantly, both inside and outside the body, as I mentioned, and we call this sensory input. So for example, outside your body, you might feel a surface and feel that it's cold or hot. So you're interacting with information from the external environment. At the same time, you might receive information from inside your body. So for example, you have sensory receptors that tell you how stretched your bladder is. And you know that sensation because when it is stretched and full, those nerves send signals to your brain saying, hey, go find a restroom, right? And so that information can come from inside or outside the body, and that's called sensory input. The nervous system then processes and interprets this information and decides what to do about it, if anything at all. So it integrates that information. So maybe in this case, you're getting information, sensory information from inside your body that your bladder is distended. You're getting information from outside your body. Maybe visually you see a sign for a restroom. Your brain puts those things together and said, hey, bladder's full, there's a place to go. And it integrates that information. And then it can send a signal, what's called a motor output, to activate effector organs. So in this case, let's think about skeletal muscles and say, hey, go over there. And so specifically, the brain is going to send messages to your leg muscles that contract your leg muscles in such a way that walks you over to the restroom so that you can respond to this information you're getting from inside and outside the environment. So it's kind of a simple schematic, but it's really important that we think of the nervous system broken down into these three processes, because these three processes kind of map on to the anatomy of the nervous system quite well. We have different kind of structures in the body that do these three tasks. So thinking about what the nervous system does functionally, let's move to what its structure is anatomically. We broadly break the nervous system down into two parts. The first is what's called the central nervous system, often abbreviated as CNS. This is two things. It's your brain and spinal cord, right? So it's the center of the nervous system. It is the place where information is integrated and signals are sent out to the rest of the body. So just the brain and spinal cord are the central nervous system. And I like that it's called central nervous system because it's central anatomically, right? These are things down the middle of your body. Also, it's central in the processes I just described. It's this, it's where this middle step happens, this integration. So it's central both functionally and anatomically. Then the rest of the nervous system we call the peripheral nervous system, often abbreviated as PNS. So this includes the cranial nerves that extend from the brain, the spinal nerves that extend from the spinal cord, clusters of these cell bodies called ganglia that we'll talk about in a little bit, and all of the nerves that extend kind of throughout the body. So what this does is all of this peripheral nervous system links the body, both inside and out, to this central nervous system. So let me get that, and then I have a diagram for you. So if we look at this anatomically, we can see a simple figure here looking at a human from the an anterior view in this case. Is that anterior or posterior? That's anterior. I thought the ears looked like they were going the other way, but that's anterior. Well, certainly looking at the pelvis. Anyway, you can see the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord, and then you have all of these nerves extending from the central nervous system, and we have these kind of bulges, these groups of cell bodies called ganglia. I have some information on here about the embryonic origins of the central and peripheral nervous systems. Don't worry about that. What I want you to know is that they are derived. These tissues are derived very early. I don't want to say this. Let me try that again. They are formed very early in development from two different sets of tissues in the embryo, but we're not going to worry about that in too much detail. So central peripheral nervous system. So let's talk a little bit more detail about sensory input versus motor output. Sensory signals are called afferent signals, and they are picked up by any of a variety of sensory receptors and carried via these nerve fibers of the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. So in other words, sensory neurons are bringing information from outside the central nervous system to the central nervous system. Now, we call these afferent signals. This is a good example of an anatomy. Two words that sound almost identical but have opposite meanings. And so we have afferent signals, but then we also have efferent signals or motor signals. What I will do in lecture, generally the pronunciation of these is afferent and efferent, which sound almost identical. I will exaggerate the sound of the first vowel so that it's afferent and efferent, just to make sure when I'm speaking it's clear which is which. Because they mean the opposite thing. Those efferent or motor signals is information that's being delivered from the central nervous system to via the peripheral nervous system to muscles and glands. So sensory is afferent and motor is efferent. Question, Abby.
Just like embryonic, sensory, like afferent nerves, they arrive to the CNS, and then efferent signals exit.
Perfect. Afferent equals arrive to CNS, and afferent arrive, and efferent exit. That's good. Actually, never heard that one. Cool. So afferent arrive, efferent exit. Exit. That's perfect. So let's look at that. So, well, this is just a repeat of information here. The important thing, and actually this works well with Abby's mnemonic device here, is our point of reference when we're talking about signals going to or away is always going to be the central nervous system, generally the brain, but the spinal cord, of course, too, in some cases. But generally, we're talking about signals going to the brain or away from the brain. So we also divide nerve fibers not only by afferent and efferent categorization, but also by where they are in the body. And so specifically, we have somatic nerves, which are going to innervate, generally speaking, organs and sensory. They're going to innervate either sensory cells or muscles or glands that are more on the external of the body. That has to do with the way your body interacts with the outside world. And so, for example, the motor neurons that send a signal to your skeletal muscle in your leg to tell you to walk, that is an example of a somatic nerve. On the other hand, we have visceral nerves, which are more associated with the inside of the body. So these are nerves that are associated with glands and organs. For example, your digestive system, your heart, your spleen, et cetera, et cetera. And so anatomically, we can divide these nerves functionally into whether they're delivering information to or away from the central nervous system. So to the central nervous system is going to be afferent, away is efferent. Then we can divide them about where they are in their body, either somatic or visceral. So let me just show you another diagram to explain that. So we have somatic sensory nerves are going to deliver information from the outside of the body generally. So in this case, from the skin, right? Sense of temperature or touch to the central nervous system. Whereas visceral sensory is going to deliver information about the status of the inside of the body. So for example, here, the stomach to the central nervous system. At the same time, we have motor or efferent neurons that are going to deliver information either in the somatic nervous system to, for example, skeletal muscle, you see here. Sorry, my red circle here got a little displaced. Or in the case of visceral motor neurons to organs, in this case, sorry, it's a little hard to see, the heart or the bladder. That was exciting. Wow, cool. So if we look at this in diagrammatic form, we can look at it like this. So I've talked about the division between the central and peripheral nervous system. We can then break the peripheral nervous system down into sensory or afferent, motor or efferent, and then we can further break that down into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And if we map that back onto everything, we get something that looks like this. So a complicated diagram here. I think, did I include this in the notes? Yeah, okay. So this is a complicated one, bringing all of this information from the previous slides together. So let's take a quick second and kind of walk through this slowly. We've got the central nervous system here, brain and spinal cord, and then we have the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is further broken down into afferent and efferent. Efferent is then broken down into the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. And then the autonomic nervous system is further broken down into two divisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, which I'm not going to cover just yet. So actually, if I should have left these two boxes off of this figure for now. We'll get to these a little bit later. What I want you to know here is these divisions of the peripheral nervous system into afferent, efferent, and somatic and autonomic. And you can see examples on the diagram here. So this is kind of combining this schematic diagram with an actual examples of where anatomically these things happen. Good there? Okay, so let's see here. We talk about the somatic sensory. So this is sensory input generally coming from the outside world. We can divide that further into three subdivisions. So we have general somatic senses. So these are receptors that are spread throughout the body, and they are related to touch, pain, vibration, pressure, temperature, et cetera, et cetera. And so the word general here just means that they're kind of widespread. These types of receptors aren't localized into a certain area, often associated with the integumentary system in the skin, right? Your skin can detect all of these things, touch, pain, vibration, pressure, temperature, et cetera. And you actually have different nerve receptors for each of those kinds of sensory input. That's just the heating system? It's really loud. Is it really loud? Cool. Maybe it'll be warm. Then we have proprioceptive senses. So these are sensory input. I said that the somatic sensory system is generally delivering information from the outside of the body. Kind of exception to that is the proprioceptive senses. These specifically help your body know where it is in space. And so they detect the stretch in tendons and muscles so that you can close your eyes and know if your arm is bent or straight out, right? You can know that without looking at your arm or without your arm touching anything, because you have neurons associated with the tendons and muscles that tell your brain if your bicep is extended in the associated tendons or if your tricep is extended, right? And so this allows you to have fine motor coordination as well. So it allows you to do things with your body maybe when you're not looking at it even. And then finally, we have the special somatic senses. Those are the senses associated with the ear and the eye. So specifically, of course, the eye is important for vision. The ear, as you might know, is important for hearing, but also for balance. So the ear provides sensory information in two very important ways that are kind of related, but very distinct, and that is hearing and balance. So I want to emphasize balance here because we very commonly think of the ears as important for hearing. That's not new information, but I want you to think of the ear as really important for your sense of balance as well, which is absolutely essential to your ability to move through space, especially us bipedal humans that spend a lot of time precariously balanced in two tiny little legs, while the rest of our body weight dangles precipitously a meter off the ground, ready to fall at any moment. Go ahead, Jada.
Vertigo, when you have something like wrong with your ears, you have like the possibility of falling over every 2 seconds. Is it messing with the senses with that?
That's exactly what it is. Yep, good connection there. So vertigo can be caused by different things, but it can be caused by, essentially it's when the receptors or the neurons for balance in your ear kind of receive mixed signals or get confused. And so what you maybe perceive as being down is actually not down, and you lose your orientation in space, right? And for us, most importantly, when you think of balance, we think of up and down. We think of our relationship to gravity. And that's why often when you get into, a position where you're not feeling gravity, you get nauseous because your body is getting these weird mixed signals. And we're so used to being in a situation where we're feeling gravity that if you're on like think like a roller coaster, or if you go over a hill really fast in your car and you lose that sense of gravity for a second, it can be really disorienting. G-force is kind of the opposite. It's when you experience increased gravity, right? So if you're on, I don't know, if you go to the fair and you go on that ride where everyone stands in a circle and then it starts to spin horizontally and then it kind of tilts up so that you're like standing, but you're like facing down. That creates an artificial sense of gravity because of the centrifugal force that you perceive as whatever way you feel that force, you perceive as being down, because you always perceive the forces of gravity as being down. So it's kind of cool. Dr. Wolverton over in our department does some cool research looking at plants and how they perceive gravity and how like they grow in space. Like he does experiments where he puts plants on the International Space Station and sees how they grow in low or no gravity environment. He doesn't go and do that. He sends the seeds and the astronauts do that. He's not an astronaut, to be clear, but his research is really neat looking at that for plants. Cool. Good, Jada. Thanks. Okay, so that's the 3 divisions of somatic sensory. We're going to talk about the special senses in some detail in a couple of weeks, maybe sooner. And actually have a lab about special senses later in the semester too. So we'll get into that in more detail. For now, I just want you to know that the eyes and ears are associated with the are categorized as special somatic senses. So that's the somatic sensory system. We also have our visceral sensory system, which we can break into 2 subdivisions. The first is general visceral senses, which are neurons that detect stretch, pain, temperature, nausea, hunger, etc. So remember, this is information generally coming from the inside of the body. So we talk about stretch of your different organs, like your intestines or your bladder. We can think about pain coming from inside the body, or even temperature. Nausea is triggered or communicated by these general visceral senses. And again, the term general here simply means that they're kind of widely distributed throughout your internal organs. Then we have special visceral senses that include taste and smell. So you've probably all heard the old adage that we have 5 senses. It's really not accurate at all. We have a whole bunch of huge variety of different senses, although those 5 are important to know, but there's more of them than simply those 5. So I want to make sure we got that. 2 of the 5 of what's thought of as these your 5 senses are categorized as visceral senses, and that is taste and smell, which are very, very closely associated. They're very important for your food consumption, but also importantly play an important role in social interactions as well. So as humans, we've kind of moved away from it, but back in the day, the sense of smell used to be really important for identifying people that you might want to spend more or less time with and that kind of thing, finding mates and all that. A lot of animals rely on sense of smell much more than humans. So for example, if you have a dog, they have a much more keen sense of smell and they navigate their environment much more by sense of smell than we do. But the sense of smell is really important. For example, in an aversion response, we all, let's find maybe a gross example, but we're all, when you smell like fecal matter, for example, or something that's decomposing, it's repulsive. Like without anyone ever telling you that that's gross, don't eat it. You know that that's gross and you don't eat it. And you think about that in an evolutionary context, it'd be important to know if something is like rotting or if it's contaminated with fecal matter or something like that, know not to eat it because you would get really sick if you did. So that sense of smell was, I would argue, probably more important historically for humans than it is now, but it's still important now in very subtle, unconscious ways. They've done studies where like in finding like mates and things like that, like humans are more attracted to people that smell a certain way, but it's not that everyone's attracted to the same person that smells the same way, but different people have like different kinds of smell compatibilities, things like that. So next time you're on a date and you feel that certain je ne sais quoi, probably your date's body odor. Cool. So it's good advice for you is just don't wear deodorant next time you go on a date. You didn't know that you're going to get dating advice in class today, but here you go. That way that person can smell you and see if they want you to be their partner. I'm going to stop there. Talking about that anyway. So as I mentioned, the visceral motor system makes up the autonomic nervous system. And so this is the nervous system that we don't consciously control, right? And you think about all of the things that go on inside our body. So again, refresh your memory, visceral means the nerves associated with the inside of the body. Motor, our signals going from the central nervous system to those organs. Generally speaking, or almost always speaking, we don't think about this. And so this is called the autonomic nervous system because we don't think about the muscles contracting to move food through our digestive system. We don't think about our glands excreting certain digestive enzymes or things like that. We don't have to consciously do that, which is great because it would be really tedious if every time you ate a meal, you had to sit there and think about digesting it for the next 12 hours. This autonomic nervous system can be further broken down to the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later on. I just want you to know those 2 names right now. So as I said, they regulate, for example, peristalsis through the digestive system, that contraction of smooth muscle, but also our heart to some extent. The heart is regulated kind of in a complex way we'll talk about later in the semester, and is at least partially regulated by this autonomic nervous system. Excuse me. Yeah, I'll just leave it. I already said that, but it's often called the involuntary nervous system. So the takeaway message here, go ahead, Em. Yeah, no, you're good.
Disorders or like injuries that can like affect like how we like don't notice it. Are there like people who like can like feel like and like think about like their stomach?
Oh. It does make sense. So the question is, are there certain individuals that can actually control this stuff voluntarily or feel that consciously?
Are for the individuals to like get their stomach taken out, like that's what I'm like, from her point of view.
Right,
that's
right.
what I'm thinking about, because don't they actually like, feel it going through the stomach bag and stuff like that? Like, wouldn't that be like the same thing?
I don't know. I don't know of any case where someone could consciously control their smooth muscle, like just the anatomy just isn't there to do that. But you'd certainly be aware of changes to that system, like if you had your stomach removed or something like that, at least until you kind of got used to it and it wasn't novel anymore for your body. Our sensory inputs are really good at detecting changes in our environment, but really, at least consciously, but not good at all at telling us when things are exactly the same as they've been, right? And so that's why, if something is someone's talking in monotone for a long period of time, you just tune them out because it's the same thing. And our sensory input isn't really attuned to telling us when something is unchanging. But when something is dynamic, gets louder and quieter, or you're watching a show and it's brighter or darker or anything like that, that's what really keeps our attention span going, consciously anyway. Good, that's a good question. So the takeaway message here is I want you to think about, I'm actually not going to do this activity now. We'll start off class with this on Friday. But what we're going to do is think about an activity where we're talking about either inputs or signals going out from the central nervous system, and if they fall into one of these 4 categories. So somatic sensory, visceral sensory, somatic motor, visceral motor. And so I think I'll just leave that activity. That'd be a good way to start us off on Friday, thinking about that. So be ready. Friday, first thing. You got this. Cool. All right. So let's go here. I'm going to skip ahead. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty anatomy of all of these nerves over the next couple classes. Just a couple quick reminders on our way out here. There's no ticket out today. There's the kind of half funny cartoon that I promised. Remember, lecture quiz number 4 is going to be next week after your practical. So don't worry about that yet. I want you to focus your energy for the class on preparing for your practical on Tuesday. With that in mind, remember, Danny has tutoring sessions. Remember, we changed the time here to 4 to 5 p.m. on Mondays, and then Thursdays tomorrow in the library. So check that out. Let me know if you have questions. The lab room is open and will be open through Monday evening next week. I will have open hours on Monday. I have another scheduling conflict. All these meetings are getting scheduled at me. I apologize, but I will have open hours on Monday, just 1 to 2. Of course, if you need something outside of that time, just shoot me an email. We can make it happen. Otherwise, we're going to end a few minutes early. Again, today I have an interview at 9, so I need to get over to that. But let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll see everyone Friday morning.